There are some words that never leave you, no matter how many years pass, no matter how hard you try to forget. They stay with you. They echo in your mind when you're washing dishes, folding laundry, or staring out a window late at night. For me, those words came from my son, the same son I had spent my entire life protecting, the same boy I once carried through emergency rooms when he had a fever. The same little boy who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares and whisper, "Mom, don't let anything happen to me." I never imagined he would become the person who broke my heart. But life has a cruel way of surprising us. My name is Evelyn Parker. I'm 68 years old, a widow, a mother, and until recently, I believed family was forever. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I woke up before sunrise. Old habits are hard to break. Even though I hadn't worked a full time job in years, my body still followed the schedule I kept for decades. I made coffee, watered the plants near the kitchen window, fed the birds that visited my backyard every morning. Then I sat quietly at the table, watching the sky brighten. The house was silent, peaceful, at least for a little while. Around 7 o'clock, I heard footsteps upstairs. My son Daniel was getting ready for work. A few minutes later, his wife Melissa joined him. The sounds of doors opening and closing echoed through the hallway. Neither of them came downstairs. Neither of them said good morning. That had become normal. Years ago, Daniel would sit with me before work and drink coffee while we talked. Now, entire days passed without meaningful conversation. I tried not to let it hurt. I told myself people get busy, people change, life gets complicated. Still, loneliness has a way of settling into your bones, especially when you're surrounded by people who no longer see you. By 9 o'clock, I grabbed my reusable grocery bags and headed to the store. I always did the shopping. Nobody asked me to. I just knew the refrigerator would be empty if I didn't. As I pushed my cart through the aisles, I found myself buying Daniel's favorite cereal, the same one he'd loved since he was 12. I bought Melissa's preferred coffee creamer, the expensive brand she liked. I picked up snacks for my grandchildren, little things, small acts of love, the kind nobody notices until they disappear. By the time I returned home, the trunk of my car was full. The grocery bags felt heavier than usual. My knees ached as I carried them inside. I remember thinking how quiet the house seemed, too quiet. The moment I stepped into the kitchen, I knew something was wrong. Daniel was sitting at the dining room table, waiting. His laptop was closed. His car keys sat beside him. He wasn't supposed to be home. At first, I thought maybe he was sick. Maybe something had happened at work. I smiled. "Daniel, honey, are you okay?" He didn't smile back. Instead, he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, detached, almost annoyed. The kind of look people give strangers, not their mothers. My stomach tightened. Slowly, I set the grocery bags on the counter. "Is everything all right?" I asked. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his forehead, as if speaking to me was exhausting, as if I were a problem he didn't want to deal with. Finally, he sighed. "Mom, we need to talk." Those 5 words instantly filled me with dread. Nobody says "we need to talk" before delivering good news. I sat down across from him. My heart is already racing. "What's wrong?" Daniel stared at the table. Then he looked directly into my eyes and said the words that changed everything. "Mom, I'm tired of seeing you." The room seemed to stop moving. For a second, I honestly thought I misunderstood him. Maybe I had heard wrong. Maybe there was more to the sentence. Maybe he meant something else. But he didn't. The silence that followed confirmed it. Every word had landed exactly as intended. I felt my throat tighten. Excuse me? Daniel sighed again, impatiently, as though I was forcing him to repeat something obvious. I'm tired of seeing you around here all the time. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. Couldn't breathe. I just stared at him, waiting for the joke, waiting for the apology, waiting for him to realize how cruel he sounded. But none of those things happened. Instead, he continued, You're always here. I looked around the room, confused. Daniel, I live here. The words came out weaker than I intended. He shook his head. That's exactly the problem. I felt as though someone had punched me in the chest. For years, I had convinced myself the tension in the house wasn't personal. I told myself Daniel was stressed, overworked, worried about bills, trying to provide for his family. But at that moment, all the excuses disappeared because the truth was sitting right in front of me, and it hurts. I swallowed hard. Have I done something wrong? His answer came quickly. No. Then why are you saying this? He rubbed his temples. You just don't understand. Help me understand. For a brief moment, guilt flashed across his face. Then it vanished. We need our own space. I stared at him. We are family. We are adults now, Mom. The word mom sounded strange coming from him. Not loving, not warm, just convenient. Like he was speaking to a coworker, not the woman who raised him. My eyes drifted toward the grocery bags, the cereal, the snacks, the food I had just bought for everyone. I suddenly felt foolish. Daniel stood up. I don't want to argue. I wasn't arguing. Look, I just needed to be honest. Honest. Funny how people use honesty as permission to be cruel. The conversation ended shortly after that, at least for him. For me, it had only begun. Because after he walked away, I sat alone at that table for nearly an hour, staring at nothing, replaying every word, every expression, every second, trying to understand how my son had become a stranger. That evening, I skipped dinner. I told everyone I wasn't hungry. Nobody questioned it. Nobody noticed. Around 10 o'clock, I headed upstairs. As I passed the hallway near Daniel's bedroom, I heard voices. His door wasn't fully closed. I should have kept walking. I know that now. But something made me stop. Something made me listen. Melissa was laughing. A quiet laugh. The kind people use when they're talking about someone. Then I heard Daniel's voice. You should have seen her face. Both of them laughed. My stomach dropped. Melissa spoke next. Do you think she finally got the message? There was a pause. Then Daniel answered, and what he said shattered the last piece of hope I had left. Honestly, another laugh. Once she leaves, we'll finally have our life back. I stood frozen in the hallway, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to believe what I was hearing. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. My son hadn't spoken out of anger. He hadn't lost control. He hadn't said something he regretted. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a bad day. This wasn't stressful. They had talked about it. I planned it, agreed on it. And suddenly everything became clear. I wasn't family anymore. I was an inconvenience, a burden, an obstacle standing between them and the life they wanted. As I quietly turned away from the bedroom door, one painful truth settled into my heart. That was the moment I realized they had already decided I didn't belong. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Daniel's voice. Mom, I'm tired of seeing you. Then the laughter. The laughter hurt even more than the words. Because words can be spoken in anger. Words can be regretted. But laughter? Laughter means they enjoyed it. Laughter means they believed it. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and walked downstairs. The house was dark and silent. I stood in the kitchen and stared through the window above the sink. The backyard was covered in silver moonlight. For years, I had looked out that same window and felt grateful. Grateful for my family, grateful for my home, grateful for the chance to watch my grandchildren grow up. Now I felt something else, something unfamiliar. I felt invisible. I wrapped my hands around a mug of coffee and sat alone at the dining table. The same table where Daniel had shattered my heart only hours earlier. As the clock ticked quietly beside me, memories began returning. Not the painful ones, the forgotten ones, the sacrifices, the struggles, the things nobody remembered except me, especially the story of this house. 20 years earlier, after my husband Robert passed away, life changed overnight. One day I was a wife planning retirement. The next I was a widow trying to survive. I was 50 years old, terrified, lost, and responsible for helping Daniel finish college. I could have sold everything and started over. Many people told me to, but I didn't. Because Daniel had dreams, and I wanted to help him reach them. So I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I skipped vacations, skipped new clothes, skipped everything that wasn't necessary. Every extra dollar went toward securing a future for my son. Years later, Daniel met Melissa. They fell in love quickly, got married quickly, and soon started talking about buying a house. The problem was simple. Neither of them qualified. Daniel had student loans. Melissa had credit card debt. The banks rejected them repeatedly. I still remember the day Daniel came home looking defeated. He sat at this very table and buried his face in his hands. Maybe we're just not meant to own a home. My heart broke for him, not because he was failing, but because he looked exactly like the little boy who used to cry whenever life disappointed him. I couldn't stand seeing that look on his face. So I did what mothers do. I helped. At first, it was supposed to be temporary. I would co sign, help them get approved, then remove my name later. Simple. At least that's what everyone believed. But when the paperwork was reviewed, another problem appeared. Daniel's financial history wasn't strong enough. The mortgage company wasn't willing to take the risk. The loan officer eventually suggested something none of us expected. Put the house entirely in my name. At the time, it seemed like the only solution. Daniel agreed, Melissa agreed, I agreed. The goal wasn't ownership, the goal was helping my family, or so I thought. A few weeks later, we moved into the house together. I took the smaller bedroom, they took the master suite. I didn't care. I wasn't thinking about ownership. I was thinking about my family. Years passed, then more years. Life happened. Children were born, jobs changed, bills came and went. But one thing never changed. Every mortgage payment passed through me. Every tax bill arrived in my name. Every insurance document carried my signature. Yet I never mentioned it, not once, because I trusted my son. The following morning, I sat at the breakfast table while everyone prepared for their day. Melissa rushed around gathering purses and paperwork. Daniel checked emails on his phone. The grandchildren argued over cereal. Normal, completely normal, as if the previous day had never happened, as if they hadn't discussed getting rid of me, as if my heart wasn't still broken. Daniel finally glanced at me. Morning. Just one word, nothing more. I nodded. Morning. For a second, I wondered if he felt guilty, if maybe he'd spent the night regretting what he'd said. But that hope disappeared quickly, because he immediately turned back to his phone. The conversation was over. An hour later, after everyone left, I began cleaning the kitchen. I wasn't trying to be helpful. I just needed something to do, something to quiet my thoughts. As I wiped down the countertops, I noticed a folder sitting near the island. Daniel must have forgotten it. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something caught my attention. The words written across the top: Property Improvement Proposal. Curious, I opened it. Inside were renovation estimates: kitchen remodel, bathroom upgrades, backyard construction, new flooring. The total cost exceeded $80,000. I stared at the numbers, confused. They couldn't afford this, not even close. Then I found something else: notes scribbled in Daniel's handwriting. Once approved, use house equity. Property value increases. Refinance later. My stomach tightened. House equity. The words lingered in my mind, not because they were shocking, because of the way they were written, as if the house belonged entirely to him, as if I didn't exist, as if my name wasn't attached to every legal document associated with the property. For the first time, I began seeing things differently, not emotionally, legally, factually, objectively. The house wasn't theirs. The house never had been. And yet they spoke about it as though I were a guest living under their generosity. The realization felt strange, almost surreal. That afternoon, I drove to the county records office. I told myself I was simply verifying information, nothing more. No grand plan, no revenge, just facts. The woman behind the counter was kind. After a few minutes, she handed me copies of the public records. I thanked her and returned to my car. Then I opened the folder. There it was, exactly as I remembered. Owner, Evelyn Parker. My name, only my name. No Daniel, no Melissa, no joint ownership, no transfer, nothing. I stared at the documents for several minutes, not because I was surprised, because I was suddenly seeing my life from a different perspective. For years, I had acted like a burden in my own home. For years, I had apologized for taking up space. For years, I had accepted disrespect because I believed I had nowhere else to go. Now I realized something. The power dynamic I believed existed wasn't real. It never had been. I wasn't dependent on Daniel. If anything, the opposite was true. The realization didn't make me happy. It made me sad. Because I wasn't looking for power. I wasn't looking for leverage. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for a son. And somewhere along the way, I'd lost him. When I returned home that evening, I noticed Daniel and Melissa sitting together in the living room. They were discussing paint colors, countertops, cabinets, renovation ideas, future plans. I stood quietly in the hallway listening, not spying, just observing. For the first time, really observing. Neither of them asked what I thought. Neither of them asked what I wanted. They talked as though the future belonged entirely to them, as though I were temporary, as though I was already gone. And suddenly I understood something that had taken me years to see. They weren't waiting for me to leave, they expected me to. In their minds, the decision had already been made. I simply hadn't received the memo. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone at my desk. The ownership documents rested beside a family photograph. Daniel was 8 years old in that picture, smiling, missing his front tooth, holding my hand. I looked at that little boy for a long time. Then I looked at the legal documents, two versions of my son, one from the past, one from the present. And for the first time since hearing those devastating words, a different feeling replaced my heartbreak. Not anger, not revenge, clarity. Slowly, I folded the documents, placed them inside a folder, and whispered something to myself, a sentence that would change everything. Maybe it's time I stopped waiting for them to choose me. Because sitting there in silence, I finally made a decision. The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely calm. Not happy, not healed, just calm. A kind of calm that comes after a storm has destroyed everything it can. There was nothing left to fear, nothing left to lose. For 2 days, I had replayed Daniel's words over and over in my head. Mom, I'm tired of seeing you. At first, those words felt like knives, but now they felt different. Now they felt like clarity. Because once someone tells you exactly how they feel about you, you no longer have to guess. You no longer have to wonder. You no longer have to make excuses for them. You simply have to decide what you're going to do next. I spent the morning making breakfast for my grandchildren. Old habits die hard. Sophia sat at the table swinging her legs while eating pancakes. Her younger brother Mason laughed every time syrup dripped onto his plate. Looking at them hurts, not because of anything they had done, because they were innocent. Children always are. The tragedy is usually created by the adults around them. When Daniel came downstairs, he barely looked at me, just grabbed a coffee and checked his phone. Melissa entered a few minutes later. Neither mentioned our conversation. Neither apologized. Neither acted uncomfortable. That bothered me more than anything. They had moved on. Meanwhile, my entire world had changed. By 9 o'clock, everyone had left. The house fell silent. I walked upstairs and entered my bedroom. For years, I had lived in the smallest room in a house that legally belonged to me. That realization still felt absurd. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the family photographs lining my dresser. Pictures from vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings, school graduations. Every image told the same story. A mother standing quietly in the background, making everyone else's happiness possible. I picked up one photograph. Daniel was 16, his arm wrapped around my shoulder. Both of us were smiling. Written on the back were 4 simple words: "Love you forever, Mom." I stared at the handwriting, then placed the picture back down. Forever had turned out to be shorter than I expected. That afternoon, I drove downtown. Not to visit friends, not to shop. I had an appointment. An appointment I never thought I would need. My attorney's office occupied the second floor of an old brick building near the courthouse. The elevator creaked on the way up. When the doors opened, a familiar receptionist greeted me. "Mrs. Parker, good to see you again." I smiled politely, though there wasn't much happiness behind it. A few minutes later, I was sitting across from David Harper, a lawyer who had helped me handle Robert's estate years earlier. His hair was grayer now, his glasses were thicker, but his sharp eyes hadn't changed. "Evelyn," he said gently, "what brings you here?" For a moment, I wasn't sure how to answer. How do you explain that your own child has become a stranger? How do you summarize heartbreak? Instead, I handed him the property documents. "I need to understand exactly where I stand." His expression became serious. He reviewed the papers carefully, page after page. Lenny looked up. "The house is entirely yours. I know. No joint ownership. I know. No transfer agreements. I know." David leaned back. "Then what are you worried about?" I hesitated, then told him everything. Daniel, Melissa, the conversation, the insults, the laughter, every painful detail. When I finished speaking, silence filled the room. David folded his hands together. His expression had changed. Now he looked concerned. "Not legally concerned. I am personally concerned." "Evelyn," he said quietly, "have you checked your credit recently?" The question surprised me. "No, I think you should." My stomach tightened. Why? He reached for his computer. Because in situations like this, financial entitlement often comes before financial fraud. The words made my skin crawl. A few minutes later, he helped me pull several reports. At first, everything looked normal. Then something appeared. A home equity inquiry. My eyes narrowed. What is that? David clicked on the file. His expression darkened. It appears someone recently explored borrowing against the property's value. I stared at the screen. What does that mean? It means someone was investigating whether the house could be used as collateral. My heart sank. Who? David looked at the application details, then slowly turned the monitor toward me. The name listed was Daniel Parker. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. Couldn't breathe. The office suddenly felt too warm, too small, too quiet. He never told me. David nodded. I assumed as much. I stared at the screen, trying to understand, trying to make sense of it. The house, the comments, the pressure, the sudden hostility. Everything was starting to connect, like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. What would happen if he had been approved? I asked. David sighed. Without ownership rights, approval would have been difficult. Difficult isn't impossible. No. The answer hung heavily in the room. Difficulty wasn't impossible, which meant Daniel had tried. Maybe he failed, maybe the bank stopped him, but he had tried. My son had attempted to leverage a property that wasn't his, without discussing it, without asking, without even informing me. The realization felt worse than the original insult, because insults come from emotion. This came from intention, planning, calculation. When I left the attorney's office, the sky had turned gray. Heavy clouds drifted overhead. The city felt colder than usual. I sat inside my car for nearly 20 minutes without starting the engine. People walked past carrying coffee cups, talking on phones, living ordinary lives. Meanwhile, mine felt like it was quietly unraveling. Eventually, I started the car, but instead of heading home, I drove to a small park near the river. Robert and I used to visit there years ago, whenever life became overwhelming, whenever we needed perspective. I sat on a bench overlooking the water. The breeze carried the scent of rain, and for the first time since all of this began, I allowed myself to cry. Not dramatic sobs, not anger, just sadness, deep sadness, because the little boy I once knew seemed gone. Somewhere between adulthood and entitlement, I had lost him, and maybe he had lost himself too. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Martha, my closest friend for more than 30 years. The kind of friend who notices when your voice sounds different. Evelyn, you okay? I tried to lie. She didn't let me. 30 minutes later, we were sitting together in a quiet cafe. As I told her everything, her expression shifted from concern to disbelief. He said that? I nodded. He tried to use the house? I nodded again. Martha leaned back. For several moments, she simply stared out the window. Then she looked directly at me. Evelyn, what? You need to stop thinking like a mother for a minute. The words stung. I'm always going to be his mother. I know. Then what are you saying? She reached across the table. I'm saying you need to start protecting yourself. Silence settled between us, because deep down I knew she was right. For years, every decision I made had been about protecting Daniel, helping Daniel, supporting Daniel, excusing Daniel. Maybe it was time for something different. Maybe it was time to protect Evelyn. That evening, I returned home. The house was loud. The television was on. The grandchildren were playing. Melissa was scrolling through her phone. Daniel was discussing some future renovation project. Everyone looked comfortable, secure, certain, as if nothing could ever change, as if the future already belonged to them. Standing quietly in the hallway, I looked around the home I had sacrificed so much to keep. Then I remembered the credit inquiry, the property documents, the laughter, the words. Mom, I'm tired of seeing you. Suddenly, something shifted inside me. Not anger, not revenge, resolve. Cold, steady, unshakable resolve. If they wanted me gone, I was going to give them exactly what they wanted, but not in the way they expected. The morning after my meeting with David Harper, I woke up feeling different. Not stronger, not happier, just certain. For weeks, I had been living inside a fog of hurt and confusion. Now the fog is gone. The truth was painful, but at least it was clear. Daniel wanted me gone. Melissa wanted me gone. And judging by the way they spoke when they thought I wasn't listening, they believed they had already won. What they didn't know was that I had stopped fighting reality. Instead, I had started preparing for it, quietly, carefully, on my own terms. That morning, I sat at the kitchen table sipping coffee while everyone rushed through their normal routines. Daniel grabbed his briefcase. Melissa complained about traffic. The grandchildren searched for missing shoes and backpacks. Life moved exactly as it always had. No one noticed I was studying them. No one noticed I was memorizing this version of my life. Because deep down, I knew it wouldn't last much longer. By 8:30, the house was empty. I walked upstairs, I opened my bedroom closet, and stared at everything I owned. 30 years of memories, photographs, jewelry, letters, keepsakes, documents, pieces of a life that suddenly felt fragile. For the first time, I asked myself a difficult question. If I walked away today, what would I take with me? The answer came quickly. Not much. Because the things that mattered most weren't furniture or decorations. They were memories, and memories fit inside boxes. I spent the next hour sorting through old belongings. One box for family photographs, another for important paperwork, a third for items Robert had left behind: his watch, his wedding band, the handwritten notes he used to hide in my purse before work. Tiny treasures that meant nothing to anyone else, but everything to me. By noon, I had filled 6 boxes. They sat neatly against my bedroom wall. A silent beginning, a quiet preparation. Nobody knew, nobody suspected, and for the first time in years, that secrecy felt empowering. That afternoon, Martha arrived. She parked 2 houses away like we'd planned. When she knocked on the door, I let her in quickly. "You ready?" she asked softly. I looked upstairs, then nodded. Together, we carried the boxes out through the side entrance, slowly, carefully, without attracting attention. My heart pounded the entire time. Not because I was doing anything wrong, because I felt like I was escaping my own life. After the last box was loaded into her car, Martha hugged me. "You okay?" I glanced back at the house, the place where I'd spent years trying to earn love that should have been freely given. "No," I admitted, "but I'm getting there." That night, Daniel came home unusually cheerful. Melissa, too. They ordered takeout, laughed with the children. We talked about vacation plans. Watching them felt surreal. Only a week earlier, I would have been grateful to see everyone happy. Now I noticed something else. Neither of them asked how I was. Neither of them cared. I might as well have been invisible. At dinner, Melissa casually mentioned a kitchen renovation. I found the perfect marble countertops. Daniel smiled. "Let's do it." I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, because they were discussing expensive upgrades to a house they didn't legally own, a house they assumed would always be theirs. The irony was almost unbearable. A few days later, I signed the lease for a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy, just a quiet 1 bedroom overlooking a lake. The building was older, the walls were simple, the furniture is modest. But the moment I stepped inside, something unexpected happened. I felt peaceful. For the first time in years, no tension, no criticism, no walking on eggshells, just silence. Beautiful silence. The property manager handed me the keys. "Congratulations, Mrs. Parker." I smiled politely, but inside I felt something else: relief, because for the first time I had somewhere to go. That evening, I sat alone in my parked car outside the apartment building, holding the keys, staring at them, thinking about how strange life can be. Years ago, I helped Daniel find a home. Now I was secretly finding one for myself. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Over the next week, I developed a routine. Every morning, after everyone left for work and school, I packed another box. Every afternoon, Martha helped me move it. Every evening, I acted normal. The process became almost mechanical. Photographs disappeared. Important documents disappeared. Family heirlooms disappeared. Little by little, pieces of my life quietly left the house. Yet nobody noticed. That hurt more than I expected, because it confirmed something painful. They weren't paying attention. Not to me, not to my room, not to my life. I could have vanished completely, and they might not have realized for days. One Thursday afternoon, I was organizing paperwork when I heard Melissa's voice downstairs. She sounded irritated, as usual. I wasn't trying to listen, but her voice carried through the house. Evelyn forgot to wash the towels again. I froze. Forgot? I hadn't forgotten. I had simply stopped doing everyone's laundry. A few seconds later, Daniel responded. Just remind her. The casual entitlement in his voice made my stomach turn. Not ask her, not thank her, not appreciating her. Remind her. As if I were an employee who wasn't performing correctly. I quietly sat back in my chair, listening. Melissa continued. Honestly, I don't understand why she can't just stay out of the way. The words hit harder than she intended, because she didn't know I could hear them, which meant they were honest. Daniel sighed. Just give it a little more time. More time. The phrase lingered in my mind. What exactly were they waiting for? For me to move out? For me to disappear? For me to finally stop existing in their world? The answer no longer mattered, because every day I was getting closer to leaving, and unlike them, I wasn't waiting for permission. A week later, nearly half my belongings had been moved. The apartment was beginning to feel real. A fresh start, a safe place, a future. Then something happened that changed everything. It started with a phone call. I was sitting in my car outside a grocery store when David Harper's name appeared on my screen. I answered immediately. David? His voice sounded serious. Evelyn, I need you to come by my office. My stomach tightened. Why? There was a pause. Then he spoke carefully. Because I found something you need to see. The drive downtown felt endless. Every possible scenario raced through my mind. Legal issues, mortgage problems, ownership disputes. But nothing prepared me for what David placed on his desk. A document, one piece of paper. Yet the moment I saw it, my blood ran cold. Someone had forged my signature, and the name attached to the paperwork changed everything. Because suddenly this wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This wasn't just about wanting me gone. This was something much darker and far more dangerous. That was the moment I discovered something that changed everything. I stared at the document for several long seconds. My name was there. My signature was there. At least it looked like my signature. But I knew immediately it wasn't mine. The way the letters curved, the pressure marks, the spacing. Someone had tried to copy it, and they had failed. Still, seeing my name on a forged legal document made my stomach twist. What is this? I finally asked. David Harper slid the paperwork closer. It appears someone attempted to file authorization forms giving access to information connected to your property. My chest tightened. Who filed it? David didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pushed another document across the desk, a request log. The name listed made my heart sink. Melissa Parker. I felt as though all the air had left the room. For a moment, I simply stared, not angry, not shocked, just exhausted. because every time I thought the situation couldn't hurt more, it somehow did. Melissa wasn't family by blood, but she had been part of my life for nearly 15 years. I had celebrated her wedding, held her babies, helped pay her medical bills after Sophia was born. I had treated her like a daughter, and now she was trying to gain access to assets that weren't hers. Was Daniel involved? I asked quietly. David folded his hands. I don't know. The answer didn't comfort me, because sometimes not knowing is worse. If Daniel knew about it, the betrayal was intentional. If he didn't know, it meant Melissa had been acting behind his back. Neither possibility felt good. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The memories came flooding back. Daniel at 6 years old, running across a soccer field, smiling, laughing, calling for me from the sidelines. Daniel at 12, bringing home a report card and proudly handing it to me. Daniel at 18, crying after his father's funeral, holding my hand and promising we'd always take care of each other. I remembered all of it. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every extra shift, every birthday gift I couldn't afford, every dream I postponed, every opportunity I gave up. Because being a mother meant putting him first, or at least I thought it did. David's voice pulled me back to reality. Evelyn. I opened my eyes. You need to start protecting yourself. The same words Martha had used. Protect yourself. Funny how people only tell you that after you've already been hurt. What should I do? David opened a folder. First, we're freezing access to anything connected to the property. I nodded. Second, I recommend moving your financial records somewhere secure. I nodded again. Third, he paused. His expression turned serious. Stop assuming they have your best interests in mind. That one hurt, because deep down, I still wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding, some explanation, some version of events where Daniel wasn't becoming the man standing against me. But reality doesn't care about hope. Reality only cares about facts, and the facts were getting harder to ignore. When I returned home that afternoon, the house felt different. Nothing had physically changed. The furniture remained in the same place. The family photos still hung on the walls. The kitchen still smelled faintly of coffee. Yet everything felt colder, like I was seeing the truth hidden beneath years of illusion. Melissa was sitting in the living room scrolling through her phone. She barely glanced up when I entered. Hi. Hello. That was it. No warmth, no affection, no curiosity. Just two people occupying the same space. I looked at her carefully, wondering if she knew, wondering if she thought she'd succeeded, wondering how long this had been going on. For years, I had blamed myself for the growing distance in the family. Maybe I talked too much. Maybe I helped too much. Maybe I was too present. Maybe I wasn't modern enough. Maybe I wasn't understanding enough. But now I saw something I had been avoiding. The problem was never my presence. The problem was their entitlement. The more I gave, the more they expected. The more I sacrificed, the more invisible I became. Somewhere along the way, kindness had been mistaken for weakness. That evening, I made dinner for everyone. One last normal evening. The grandchildren laughed. The television played in the background. Daniel talked about work. Melissa discussed an upcoming school event. Nobody argued. Nobody mentioned moving. Nobody mentioned the house. To an outsider, we probably looked like a happy family. But appearances can be deceptive, especially when resentment is hiding beneath the surface. Halfway through dinner, Sophia smiled at me. Grandma, are you coming to my school play next month? The question caught me off guard. For a second, I didn't know how to answer, because I honestly didn't know where I'd be living by then. I forced a smile. I'll do my best, sweetheart. She grinned, satisfied with the answer. Children accept uncertainty much more easily than adults. Later that night, after everyone had gone upstairs, I remained alone at the table. The dishes were clean, the lights were dim, the house was quiet. I looked around slowly. This room had witnessed so much life: birthday cakes, holiday dinners, late night conversations, family celebrations. Yet now it felt like a museum, a place preserving memories of people who no longer existed. I thought about Robert. What would he say if he could see all this? Would he tell me to stay, fight, forgive? Or would he tell me something I desperately needed to hear? That loving someone doesn't mean allowing them to destroy your peace. The next morning, I began taking additional precautions. Important documents moved to a secure storage unit, bank information transferred, personal records organized. Every step felt strange, almost paranoid, yet every new discovery justified the caution. By Friday afternoon, I had created an entirely separate life, one that existed beyond Daniel's reach, beyond Melissa's reach, a future they knew nothing about. That evening, something happened that finally broke the last thread holding me back. I came home earlier than expected. The house was unusually quiet. As I walked toward the hallway, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Daniel and Melissa. They hadn't realized I was home. I stopped, not because I intended to listen, because I heard my name. Melissa sounded frustrated. "She's taking forever." Daniel sighed. "Just be patient." Patient. The word immediately caught my attention. Then Melissa lowered her voice. "If she leaves on her own, everything becomes easier." My heart stopped. Everything becomes easier. Not happier, not healthier, easier. As though I were a problem to solve, a burden to remove, an obstacle standing in the way of their plans. Then Daniel said something I'll never forget. "Trust me." A pause. Then, "Mom always gives in eventually." The words hit harder than the forgery, harder than the insults, harder than anything else. Because he was right. I always had. Every time. I gave in, I sacrificed, I compromised, I forgave. I was protected. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. That was who I had been. But standing there in the hallway, listening to my own son describe me as predictable, something shifted inside me. Not anger, not revenge, something stronger. Acceptance. The painful acceptance that the son I loved was gone. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. The boy who once worried about hurting my feelings would never have spoken those words. The man in that kitchen had. Quietly, I turned away before they could see me. I walked upstairs. I closed my bedroom door and sat on the edge of my bed. For a long time, I simply stared at the wall, thinking, remembering, grieving. Because that's what this really was: grief. Not for a death, for a relationship, for a version of my son that no longer existed. Tears rolled down my cheeks. Not many, just enough to acknowledge the truth. Then I wiped them away, opened the small safe beside my closet, and removed every remaining document connected to my future. The apartment lease, the storage receipts, the financial records, the ownership papers, everything. One by one, I placed them into a bag, carefully, methodically, deliberately. For the first time in my life, I stopped protecting my son. The morning I left felt strangely ordinary. The sun rose, the coffee brewed, the birds gathered outside the kitchen window. Everything looked exactly the same. Yet I knew that by the end of the day, nothing would be. For weeks, I had been preparing, packing quietly, moving boxes discreetly, building a future one careful step at a time. Now there was only one thing left to do: leave. I woke before everyone else. The house was silent, still asleep. For a few minutes, I sat on the edge of my bed and listened. The hum of the air conditioner, the creak of old floorboards, the distant sound of traffic outside. Simple sounds, ordinary sounds, the sounds of a home that had once been filled with love. I looked around my room. The walls were bare now. The photographs were gone. The keepsakes were gone. The boxes were gone. Only a suitcase remained. One suitcase. 68 years of life reduced to what truly mattered. Oddly enough, it felt freeing. I stood and slowly zipped the suitcase closed. The sound echoed through the room. Final, permanent. I wasn't just leaving the house, I was leaving a chapter of my life. Downstairs, I made coffee one last time. The familiar aroma filled the kitchen. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and stood at the window, watching the sunrise, remembering the first day we moved into this house, Daniel carrying furniture, Melissa decorating the living room, the excitement, the laughter, the dreams. Back then, we truly believed we were building something together. Somewhere along the way, that dream had disappeared, and none of us had noticed until it was too late. At 7 o'clock, the house came alive. Footsteps upstairs, running water, cabinet doors opening, the usual morning routine. I remained calm, smiling when the grandchildren came downstairs, helping Sophia find her backpack, fixing Mason's crooked collar, holding them a little longer than usual when they hugged me goodbye. Not because I was saying goodbye forever, because I wasn't sure when I would see them again. That uncertainty hurt more than anything else. Daniel eventually appeared, coffee in hand. The phone is already open, distracted as always. He glanced at me. Morning, morning. Nothing more. No conversation, no eye contact. No awareness that this would be the last morning we shared under the same roof. Melissa appeared a few minutes later, already stressed, already rushing, already irritated about something. Neither of them noticed the absence of emotion in my face, the absence of expectation, the absence of hope. I had finally stopped waiting for them to change. By 8:30, everyone was gone. The house fell silent once again. I looked around slowly. Every room held memories. The kitchen where Daniel learned to make pancakes. The hallway where family photos once hung. The living room where we celebrated birthdays and holidays. For a moment, grief hit me unexpectedly. Not because I doubted my decision, because I finally understood what I was losing. You can leave a house, you can leave people, you can leave a situation, but you can't leave memories behind. They travel with you. I walked through each room one final time, not saying goodbye, simply acknowledging the life I had lived there. When I reached the front door, I paused. The house felt different now, smaller somehow, less important, because I had finally realized something. It wasn't the house that mattered. It was the peace I had sacrificed trying to keep it. And that peace was worth more than any building. A few minutes later, Martha arrived. She parked discreetly in the driveway. When she stepped out of her car, she immediately noticed my suitcase. You ready? I looked back at the house, then nodded, as ready as I'll ever be. Together, we loaded the last of my belongings. The process took less than 10 minutes. Years of sacrifice, decades of memories, reduced to a few boxes and one suitcase. Life has a strange way of teaching us what truly matters. Before getting into the car, I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a short note, not an explanation, not an argument, just a few simple sentences. Daniel, you told me you were tired of seeing me. You won't have to anymore. Take care of yourself, Mom. I placed the envelope on the kitchen table. Then I walked away. No tears, no confrontation, no dramatic goodbye, just silence. the same silence that had existed between us for months. As Martha's car pulled away from the curb, I looked through the rearview mirror. The house grew smaller, then smaller still, until it disappeared completely. For the first time in weeks, I took a deep breath and realized I could finally breathe again. The apartment felt peaceful. The moment I stepped inside, the tension I'd been carrying began to fade. No criticism, no walking on eggshells, no waiting for another painful comment. Just quiet. Beautiful quiet. That evening, I sat on the small balcony overlooking the lake. The water reflected the orange glow of sunset. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine trees. For the first time in years, nobody needed anything from me. Nobody expected anything from me. I was simply Evelyn, not a caretaker, not a provider, not a burden, just Evelyn. The realization nearly brought me to tears. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. Daniel. I stared at the screen. For several seconds, I considered answering. Then I declined the call. A minute later, he called again, then again, then again. 5 missed calls. A text followed. Mom, where are you? Another. Why aren't you answering? Then another. Did something happen? I set the phone down, not because I was trying to punish him, because for the first time, I wasn't rushing to rescue him from discomfort. He could sit with uncertainty for a while. I'd been doing it for months. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls, 9 text messages, and 3 voicemails. Daniel's tone changed with each one. The first few sounded annoyed. Then I was confused. Then I was concerned. Then desperate. I listened to them all. The contrast was startling. Only days earlier, he was tired of seeing me. Now he couldn't stop looking for me. The irony wasn't lost on me. By noon, Martha called. You should hear what's happening. What happened? Daniel went to your room. I sat upright. And? He finally realized most of your things are gone. A long silence followed. I imagined his expression, the confusion, the panic, the disbelief. For weeks, I'd been quietly removing pieces of my life from that house, and he hadn't noticed, not once. Martha continued. Apparently, he spent an hour going through the house, looking for answers, looking for clues, looking for you. I looked out across the lake. The water remained calm, unbothered, peaceful, exactly how I wanted my life to feel. Later that afternoon, another voicemail arrived. This one sounded different. No anger, no frustration, just fear. Mom. A long pause. Then, please call me back. I closed my eyes because for the first time since all of this began, I heard something in his voice I hadn't heard in months. Not entitlement, not an annoyance, fear. The fear of realizing that someone you took for granted might actually be gone. But the story wasn't over because in 3 days, the phone rang again. And this time, everything changed. 3 days after I left, my phone rang again. This time, I answered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear Daniel breathing, heavy, uneven, like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. Mom? His voice sounded smaller than I remembered, weaker, almost frightened. Yes, another silence. Then, where are you? I looked out across the lake beyond my apartment balcony. The morning sun shimmered across the water. A pair of ducks drifted lazily near the shore. Peaceful, simple. The exact opposite of the chaos waiting on the other end of the phone. I'm safe. His relief was immediate. So you're okay. I am. Why didn't you tell me where you were going? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the question itself revealed how little he understood. For weeks, he had wanted me gone. Now he wanted explanations. I didn't think it mattered. The silence that followed was deafening, because deep down, he knew exactly what I meant. Mom, his voice cracked slightly. Can we talk? We're talking. No, I mean face to face. I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted to protect the peace I'd finally found. But another part needed answers, needed closure, needed to see whether there was anything left of the son I once knew. Fine. His relief was obvious. Thank you. We agreed to meet the following afternoon. A small cafe halfway between his neighborhood and my apartment. Neutral territory. No house, no memories, no power dynamics. Just two people. When I arrived the next day, Daniel was already there. The sight of him startled me. He looked exhausted. Dark circles beneath his eyes, wrinkled clothes, unshaven. For the first time in years, he looked vulnerable, not successful, not confident, not in control, just tired. The moment he saw me, he stood up. Mom. I nodded. Daniel. We sat. An awkward silence settled between us. Eventually, he spoke. You could have told me. Told you what? That you were leaving. I stared at him. You told me you were tired of seeing me. His eyes immediately dropped. For a moment, he looked ashamed. Then he rubbed his face. I didn't mean it like that. The words sounded familiar. Convenient. Late. I think you meant exactly what you said. Daniel sighed heavily. Mom, things have been stressful. I almost smiled. There it was, the excuse. The same excuse I'd been making for him for years. Stress, pressure, work, bills, life. Always something. Never accountability. I've heard that before. He looked away. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then he said something unexpected. The house feels different. I raised an eyebrow. Different? Empty. The irony nearly took my breath away. For years, I'd been invisible. Now my absence has become impossible to ignore. What do you want from me, Daniel? The question hit him hard, because he didn't have an answer, at least not immediately. Finally, he said, I want things to go back to normal. I stared at him, then slowly shook my head. Normal wasn't working. He looked genuinely confused, as though the possibility had never occurred to him. That maybe normal had only benefited him, not me. The conversation ended shortly afterward. Neither of us were satisfied. Neither of us healed. But something important happened before we left. Something that changed everything. As Daniel stood to leave, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His expression immediately shifted. Panic. Real panic. What's wrong? I asked. He hesitated, then answered. It's the bank. My stomach tightened. The bank. Interesting. He stepped away to take the call. I watched from a distance. Every second, his face became paler. His shoulders slumped. The confidence drained from him completely. When he returned, he looked shaken. What happened? He stared at me. Then I looked away. Then back at me, as though he was deciding whether to tell the truth. Finally, he did. They denied the loan. What loan? The renovation loan. I said nothing. He continued. They said the property ownership records don't match the information we provided. There it was. The moment reality finally arrived. For years, Daniel had been living as though the house belonged to him, planning around it, spending against it, building his future on it. Now he was discovering the truth. The foundation beneath his plans wasn't his. Never had been. His voice grew quieter. The house is in your name. Not a question, a realization. I nodded. Yes. He stared at me, the same way people stare at an oncoming storm. Slowly, disbelievingly, fearfully. You never told me. The accusation surprised me. I never hid it either. He had no response, because he knew I was right. Every mortgage statement, every tax bill, every insurance document. My name had always been there. He simply never paid attention because he never expected to need to. For the first time, I saw something in Daniel's eyes I hadn't seen in years. Not anger, not annoying, not entitlement, fear. The fear that comes when a person realizes their assumptions were wrong, very wrong. Over the next week, things escalated quickly. The phone calls increased. The messages became more urgent. Then one afternoon, David Harper called me. His voice sounded serious. Evelyn, what is it? I received an inquiry. My stomach tightened. From who? Daniel. I closed my eyes. Of course. What did he want? David sighed. He wanted information regarding ownership transfer procedures. I laughed softly, not because it was amusing, because it was predictable. He wants the house. I believe so. The sadness I expected never came, only clarity. For years, I had mistaken dependence for love. Now the difference was becoming painfully obvious. The following evening, another message arrived from Daniel. This one was longer, more emotional, more desperate. Mom, please call me. We need to figure this out. Figure what out? There was nothing left to figure out. The truth had finally arrived. And the truth was simple. He had spent years assuming I would always be there, always available, always willing to sacrifice. Now he was discovering something unexpected. I had a life outside of him, a future outside of him, choices outside of him, and that realization terrified him. But the biggest shock was still coming, because 2 days later, Daniel received a call from David Harper, a call he never expected, a call that would completely change the balance of power. The call informed him of one simple fact. If I chose to sell the house, there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop me. And when Daniel heard those words, everything began to unravel. Then the buyers arrived. The first time I saw the real estate sign in the front yard, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness because so many memories had been created inside those walls. Relief because for the first time in years, I was making a decision entirely for myself. Not for Daniel, not for Melissa, not for anyone else, just me. The sign stood quietly in the grass beneath a bright blue sky. For sale. 2 simple words, yet they carried the weight of an entire lifetime. I sat in my car across the street for several minutes, watching, thinking, remembering. Then I drove away. The decision had been made. There was no going back. Within days, the calls became relentless. Daniel called. Melissa called. Even extended family members started calling. People who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly wanted to know how I was doing. Funny how concern appears when assets are involved. One afternoon, my sister Carol called. Evelyn, what's going on? I sighed. What have you heard? She hesitated. Daniel says you're selling the house. The fact that he was discussing it with relatives didn't surprise me. What else did he say? Another pause. He said you're being unreasonable. I couldn't help laughing. The sound startled even me. Unreasonable. After years of sacrifices, years of disrespect, years of being treated like an unwanted guest, now I was unreasonable. The word no longer hurts, because I finally understood something. People often call you unreasonable when they lose control over you. A week later, the first buyers toured the property, then another, then another. The market was strong, interest was high, the house didn't stay available for long. That was when Daniel's panic truly began. He showed up at my apartment unexpectedly one Saturday morning. I opened the door and nearly didn't recognize him. His confidence was gone. His composure was gone. Even his posture seemed different, smaller, defeated. Mom, his voice cracked. For a brief moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, and that made everything harder. What are you doing here? We need to talk. I considered closing the door. Instead, I stepped aside. 5 minutes. He entered slowly, looking around, taking in my small apartment, the modest furniture, the peaceful view, the simple life I was building. His expression revealed something unexpected. Guilt. Real guilt. I didn't know you were living here. No, you didn't. The answer landed exactly as intended, because it was true. He hadn't known. He hadn't asked. He hadn't cared. Until now. We sat across from each other in silence. Finally, he spoke. Please don't sell the house. There it was. The real reason he'd come. Not concerned. Not reconciliation. The house. Always the house. I folded my hands calmly. Why? His mouth opened, then closed. Because he didn't have a good answer. At least not one that didn't sound selfish. Finally, he said, the kids grew up there. I nodded. They did. We have memories there. So do I. His eyes lowered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he tried again. We can work things out. The words sounded hollow. Too late. Months too late. Years too late. Can we? I asked quietly. Daniel looked away, because deep down, he knew the answer. The problem wasn't one argument. The problem was years of behavior, years of assumptions, years of taking me for granted. You can't repair that with a single conversation, especially when the conversation only happens after consequences arrive. A few days later, Melissa called, the first time she'd contacted me directly since I left. Evelyn. The way she said my name immediately told me she wanted something. No warmth, no affection, just urgency. Hello, Melissa. A long pause followed. Then, I think we're all making mistakes. Interesting. Not we hurt you. No, we're sorry. Just mistakes. As though this entire situation had accidentally happened. I listened quietly. For nearly 20 minutes, she explained why selling the house would be difficult for everyone. The children, the schools, the neighborhood, the finances, everything except my feelings, everything except my pain. When she finally stopped talking, I asked one simple question. Melissa, what? When was the last time you asked how I was doing? Silence. Complete silence. Because she couldn't remember. Neither could I. The call ended shortly afterward. That night, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset. The lake reflected shades of gold and orange. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. Peace. That's what I felt. Peace. And once you've experienced real peace, it's impossible to ignore how exhausting chaos used to be. A week later, the house officially went under contract. The buyers were a young couple expecting their first child. They loved the neighborhood. I loved the backyard. I loved the schools. Watching them walk through the property reminded me of Daniel and Melissa years ago. Full of hope, full of excitement, full of dreams. The difference was that these two looked grateful. The closing date was set for 3 weeks later. The moment Daniel learned the sale was moving forward, he called me again. This time he wasn't angry, he wasn't defensive, he wasn't negotiating. He was begging. Mom, please. His voice trembled. Please don't do this. The desperation was genuine. For the first time, I believed he truly understood what he was losing. Unfortunately, understanding arrives too late for many people. Why now, Daniel? The question caught him off guard. What? Why are you fighting so hard now? He struggled to answer because the truth was painful. The answer wasn't love. The answer wasn't family. The answer was loss. Only when something began slipping away did it become valuable. That realization broke my heart more than anything else, because I wanted my son to value me when he thought I would stay forever, not after I decided to leave. The final meeting took place 2 days before closing. Daniel asked if we could see each other one last time. I agreed. We met at the house, the same house where everything began, the same house where everything ended. When I arrived, he was standing on the front porch, waiting. Older somehow, not physically, emotionally. Life had finally forced him to confront consequences. Inside, the house felt empty. Boxes lined the walls. The furniture had been removed. Rooms echoed when we spoke. Daniel looked around quietly, then at me. Tears filled his eyes. Real tears, not manipulation, not strategy.
Regret.
Mom, his voice broke. I'm sorry. For a moment, I simply stared at him, waiting, because apologies are easy, accountability is harder. He swallowed hard, then continued. I should never have said those things. I remained silent. I should have treated you better. Still silent. You deserved better. The room felt heavy. Years of pain hung between us. Then I looked directly into his eyes. The same eyes I'd looked into when he was a baby. The same eyes that once trusted me completely. And I finally said the words I'd been carrying for months. You told me you were tired of seeing me. Tears rolled down his cheeks. I continued. You got your wish. The words hit him like a punch because they were true, brutally true, painfully true. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out a sealed envelope. Daniel frowned. What's that? I placed it in his hands. His fingers trembled as he took it. Inside that envelope was something he never expected. Not legal papers, not financial documents, not revenge. Something far more powerful. The truth. And when he opened it later that night, everything would finally make sense. For several moments after I handed Daniel the envelope, neither of us moved. The empty house stood silent around us. Dust floated through the afternoon sunlight. The rooms that had once been filled with laughter now echoed with every breath. Slowly, Daniel looked down at the envelope in his hands. What is this? I swallowed hard. Something I should have given you years ago. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a letter, nothing more. Just a letter from a mother to her son. The kind of letter that can only be written when there is nothing left to lose. Daniel unfolded the pages carefully. Then he began reading. For several minutes, the only sound inside the house was the rustling of paper. I watched silently as his expression changed. Confusion, recognition, pain, regret, then tears. Real tears. The letter wasn't about the house. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about ownership. It was about love, about sacrifice, about all the things mothers do that nobody notices. I had written about the night his father died, how terrified I was, how I sat alone in the hospital parking lot, wondering how I would raise a teenage boy by myself. I wrote about the second job I took, the vacations I skipped, the retirement savings I spent helping him build a future. I wrote about every moment I chose his happiness over my own. Not because I wanted credit, because I wanted him to understand. Then came the final paragraph, the part that mattered most. Daniel, I never wanted repayment. I never wanted recognition. I never wanted ownership. I only wanted love. When you told me you were tired of seeing me, I realized something painful. I had spent years protecting our relationship by accepting things I never should have accepted. That wasn't love, that was fear. I was afraid that if I stopped giving, I would lose you. The truth is, I lost you anyway. I hope one day you understand that the house was never what mattered. You were. Love always, Mom. By the time he finished reading, tears were streaming down his face. He lowered the letter slowly, then looked at me. For a moment, I saw the little boy from those old photographs. The boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street. The boy who cried when he scraped his knee. The boy who once believed his mother could fix anything. I'm sorry, his voice cracked. I'm so sorry. I believed him. That was the hardest part. I believed he meant it. But some truths arrive too late. Some lessons only appear after damage has already been done. And some relationships can heal without ever becoming what they once were. I walked over and gently touched his shoulder. Not because everything was forgiven, because forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. I know. That was all I said. I know. The closing took place 2 days later. The paperwork was signed, the keys were transferred, and just like that, the house was no longer mine or Daniel's. It belonged to a young family beginning a new chapter. As I watched them standing together on the front porch, smiling and excited, I felt something unexpected. Not sadness, hope. Because home should be filled with gratitude, not resentment, with love, not an obligation. As I drove away for the final time, I didn't look back. Not because I was angry, because I was ready. Ready for whatever came next. The following months passed quietly, peacefully. For the first time in years, my life belonged entirely to me. I joined a book club. I started taking morning walks around the lake, made friends with neighbors, rediscovered hobbies I had abandoned decades earlier. Little by little, I began remembering who I was before every decision revolved around someone else. The apartment slowly transformed into a home. Photographs returned to shelves. Flowers appeared on the balcony. Laughter returned to my life. Not loud laughter, gentle laughter, the kind that comes from peace. Daniel called regularly. At first, I kept the conversation short, polite, careful. Time has a way of teaching patience, and trust takes longer to rebuild than it does to destroy. Months later, he visited. Then I visited again. Sometimes he came alone, sometimes with the children. Sophia and Mason loved the lake. They fed ducks and asked endless questions about everything. Being with them reminded me that not all love has conditions attached to it. One afternoon, nearly a year after I left, Daniel sat beside me on the balcony. The sun was setting, golden reflections danced across the water. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he finally said something. I didn't realize how much you did. I smiled sadly. Most children don't. He nodded. Tears filled his eyes again. Not dramatic tears, just honest ones. I thought you'd always be there. The words hung in the air between us. Simple, painful, true. I looked out at the lake, then answered softly. That's the mistake people make. He turned toward me. What do you mean? I smiled. Forever feels permanent until it isn't. Neither of us spoke after that. We didn't need to, because some lessons are learned through silence. The same way some wounds heal, slowly, quietly, over time. That evening, after Daniel left, I remained on the balcony watching the sunset. The sky glowed orange and gold. The water shimmered beneath the fading light. And for the first time since everything began, I felt complete. Not because I had won, not because I had sold the house, not because anyone suffered consequences. I felt complete because I had finally chosen myself. After a lifetime of sacrificing my peace to keep everyone else comfortable, I had discovered something important. Walking away wasn't the hardest thing I'd ever done. Staying would have been. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: the people who truly love you never make you earn your place in their lives. They simply make room for you. If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved in order to find peace? I'd love to hear your story. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't holding on, it's letting go. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been taken for granted by someone you loved? Have you ever given everything to a person only to realize they no longer appreciated the sacrifices you made? If you've experienced something like that, share your story in the comments below. I read every comment, and your story may help someone else who is going through the same thing right now. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories about family, betrayal, resilience, and second chances. Remember this: you should never have to earn your place in the hearts of people who truly love you. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.